Hey nerdy knitter, I love to wear rectangle shawls. They are fun to knit and they're easy to wear. And if you add something interesting like some bias shaping, that just makes it more fun to knit. We're going to look at 10 patterns that are basic rectangle shawls, but they use bias knitting to create the interesting shape. But before we look at those patterns, I just want to say, hey, I'm Tanya here at Nerdy Knitting. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a knitwear designer. My goal is to help you become a more confident, adventurous knitter. So to prepare for this video, I spent some time searching through Lovecrafts, one of my favorite places to look for knitting patterns. I looked at rectangle shawls and some parallelograms and arrow-shaped shawls as well. They all fit within that rectangle shape, and they all include some type of knitting on the bias. I've got my laptop ready right here so we can chat about these patterns and take a look at them and find one that you might want to knit. The first pattern I'd love to chat about is Ambah O'Brien's Adventurer Scarf and Wrap. She has lots of great designs, many of them shawl patterns. I really think her shawls are really interesting and fun. She has some interesting designs that were created with mini skein sets in mind, especially the Advent mini skeins. But of course you can take these and adapt them and change them to any yarn that you might have. And that's also the case with this Adventurer Wrap and Scarf. Now this was designed with the use of Advent minis, but it's definitely easily customizable. I used 4 skeins of yarn to knit a fade-like version of this scarf. Now it's just knit in garter stitch with a chevron shape, and then it has some simple lace in there as well. And it's also knit on the bias, and you can see that as you see those chevron, those decreased lines, they sort of move on a bias instead of straight across the shawl. And the pattern includes 2 different sizes, a scarf and a large wrap in fingering weight yarn, and it includes written and charted instructions. Then there's Festival of Stitches by Lisa Hands, and Lisa is another designer who has really great shawl designs. She loves to play with color and combining stitch patterns and texture as well, and you can see that in a lot of her designs, especially this one, Festival of Stitches. It combines really fun, interesting colors with lots of stitch patterns. There's interesting elements like cables and mosaic knitting and lace and twisted stitches all in this one design. Now this one's knit on the bias as well, but it's really interesting. It starts like a top-down triangle shawl, but then instead of just a triangle shawl shape, it grows out at each side after that depth is reached, and it becomes a rectangle instead. This one uses 3 colors of fingering weight yarn and includes written instructions and charts. And then there's another Ambah O'Brien pattern I like, the ADVENTuresome wrap. And of course this one uses those Advent minis as well, but you can customize and use any yarn that you have on hand or that you want to buy, especially for this project. This would be a great time to maybe stash bust or look through your stash and see what you have and what interesting color combinations you could come up with. You cast on all the stitches and you work paired increases and decreases, and that gives it that bias shaping. And it has pretty lace sections that use those Advent minis. Then you have a complementary solid color that you use to work the garter sections in between. Now it comes in just one size, but it's easily adjustable, and it uses mini skeins, but it would be easy to stash dive or change the number of colors. Then we have Botanique by Casapinka, and Casapinka is another one of those designers that loves to combine color and texture and different stitch patterns, as you'll see in this shawl. Now this one's a bit more complex with some special stitch patterns going on. There are 15 sections plus the borders with lots of switching between colors and interesting textures and stitch techniques. It's definitely something for those who like to change things up while they knit. It's one size and it's knit on the bias in 4 colors. Then there's the Audra wrap by Ambah O'Brien. I think at this point you can tell that I really like Ambah O'Brien's patterns. Now this one is knit on the bias with an eyelet border and alternating sections of airy garter stripes with sections of lace. And I love the combination of different weights of yarn in this pattern. It gives us that light, airy feel. Now it has one size, but it combines 3 yarns, 2 colors of fingering yarn along with a lace weight yarn. Now, if you're intrigued by the idea of knitting a bias shawl, then I have a whole video devoted just to that topic, but we'll talk about that later on. For now, let's just look at some interesting patterns that use that shaping. But if you're finding this video helpful, I would really appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up so it will reach more people. Then there's another design by Lisa Hands, Dreaming in a Field of Wildflowers, and this one uses the same construction as her other pattern, where it starts out like a top-down triangle shawl, but instead of continuing as a triangle, it sort of ends up becoming a rectangle instead, something that's really interesting to knit. Now this design combines colors and garter stitch stripes and sections of lace, and it has that really interesting bias construction shape. I haven't knit this shape yet, but I think it's going to be on my list to knit pretty soon. Now this one's knit in fingering weight yarn, one main color and then 3 contrasting colors, but it would certainly be easy to customize and use as many or as few colors as you prefer. Then there's the ribbon wrap by illitilli, and I really love this design. It's just garter stitch, but the choice of bias knitting and the color combinations really creates an interesting pattern. Now you can see that's just garter stitch and it's on the bias, and it uses some shaping and the different colors to produce this really fun and interesting ribbon-like panel across the body of the wrap. Now this really fun design is knit in 4 colors of worsted weight yarn. So you have that solid background color and then those 3 colors that are sort of graduated from one color to the next to create that ribbon. Then there's Verdon by Melanie Berg. Melanie Berg also produces really beautiful shawl patterns, some really simple, some more complex, but they're all just absolutely lovely. And actually the second shawl that I ever knit was a Melanie Berg shawl, her Drachenfels shawl. It was lovely to knit, really simple, but with enough going on that for my beginner level skills, it was interesting and lots of fun to knit too. And then there's this one here, this fun bias shaping in this shawl. It uses short rows to create the shape. There's lots of easy garter stitch stripes, which is a hallmark of many of her designs, but then it includes other things for interest. In this case, it's some lace that gives it that additional interest. And this one is knit in fingering weight yarn in 4 different colors. Then there's Obvious by Martina Behm, and Martina Behm is one of those designers who likes to use interesting construction methods to create unique shapes, and this shawl is no different. Now this fun geometric design, it's in large graphic colors. Now it's knit in garter stitch, so it will feel really simple, but then it has that geometric shaping, and that really keeps it interesting. Just one size, 5 yarn colors in a sport weight yarn. Then there's Electra from Truly Myrtle. Now Truly Myrtle has lots of great designs as well, shawls and other things, and lots of lovely cardigans and sweaters. I really like some of her sweater patterns, but of course we're talking about shawls today. And this one has that bias arrow shaping. So it begins with a section of lace, and then you work through different sections of slip stitches and a honeycomb stitch, more lace, and then while you're working those different stitch patterns, you're also changing colors as well. So there's lots of interest in this shape and in all of the things that are going on. Now this one is knit in fingering weight yarn, and it uses 3 contrasting colors. Remember that video I mentioned earlier? It's all about how to get this effect of knitting on the bias in a rectangle shawl. That's this video right here where I explain 2 different ways you can knit on the bias to create a rectangle shawl. So click right there to learn how this construction method is done, and I'll see you in the next video.